right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Knock It Out of the Park EPA Brownfields Workshop, part 2. Kate, you are currently sharing the facilitator slides.
All right, let me change that. All right, how's that?
That's awesome.
Okay,
Yes, perfect. Great. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully a few more people, or likely a few more people, will jump on later, but we do have quite a bit of content to cover. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Next slide. So here's an overview of information we're going to be covering today. I'm Maggie Ballinger. I'm the Senior Director for the KSU Technical Assistance to Brownfields program. We are also joined today by Danielle Getzinger with Adapta, who's going to go over EJ Screen and the CGES tool, talking about how you can use these tools to gather data and build your community profile. Then we will give an overview of our TabEZ grant writing tool. We'll take just a quick break to stretch, do what you need to do, maybe refill your water, coffee, what have you. And then Kate will lead us through a guided walkthrough of sections 3 and 4 of the grant narrative. And we will also be joined by Wade Broadhead with the City of Pueblo, who will tag on to Kate's discussion with examples of what they did for their successful multi-purpose grant last year. Then we're going to break everybody out into group exercises, and we'll spend about 30 minutes in a group exercise, and then we'll wrap up at the end, tying it all together. Next slide. So we are on Zoom. If for some reason you experience any technical difficulties during today's webinar, you lose connection or you're having issues with sound or something, please feel free to reach out. You can call Sherry Walsh at 785-200-7005 or send an email to chsr@ksu.edu, and we'll do our best to try to get you reconnected or resolve any other issues you may be having. The presentation is being recorded today, so if you do lose connectivity and you're not able to rejoin, no problem. Within a few days, we will have the recording posted to the website, the event website for this event, as well as part 1, in case you missed part 1. So you'll be able to come back and access all the information as needed. And just a quick reminder of kind of some Zoom basics etiquette. Everybody is started off being muted with videos off. This just helps with overall broadband and audio visual capabilities. In order for us to verify your attendance, and that way you can receive a certificate and it can be counted towards whatever, continuing education credits you may need. If you could rename yourself to your actual name, if that is not what appears in the participant panel, that would be great. You can do that by opening up the participant panel that's located on the bottom of the Zoom toolbar, going over to your name, and under the More button, click the drop-down menu and click Rename, and then just type in your name, whatever will be easily identifiable so we can mark you as attended. Also, as a reminder, you can ask questions through the chat. Again, there is a chat feature at the bottom of the Zoom panel. Just open that up and you can put your questions into everyone. If you have questions throughout the presentation, we will take a pause after each presentation to hopefully answer those questions and get those addressed. Technical Assistance to Brownfields tab. TAB is a nationally funded program through the US EPA Brownfields. There are currently 6 TAB providers that provide free technical assistance to communities and tribes. Here at Kansas State University, we provide support specific support to communities in EPA regions 5, 6, 7, and 8. So all of those states there in purple, and then there are other tab providers, as you can see on this slide, to support communities in the other surrounding states. All the services provided by any tab provider is provided at free, no cost to communities or tribes, and we really try to tailor to fit that need to the community's need, ask, or whatever it is they need. Slide. Here at KSU, we really focus on helping communities and tribes build capacity, and we do that through offering outreach and education, such as the workshops we're doing today. We also offer community or site-specific assistance, identifying, prioritizing sites, strategic planning, reuse visioning, economic support like market analysis, highest and best use analysis, feasibility studies, things like that. Anything, we like to say we fill gaps. So if you are redeveloping a particular site, a particular neighborhood, area, corridor, and you're struggling with a particular piece of that to move on to the next steps, reach out to your tab provider, and they can help you get over that hurdle, get over that obstacle to keep things moving and going forward. All right, and with that, I'm going to pass it off to Danielle Getzinger with Adapta to talk about how to go about building a community data profile.
Okay,
Thank
Danielle, I
you.
just stopped sharing, so go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. We good? Can you see it?
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay. And if there are any questions as I'm going, feel free to drop them in the chat. And Kate and Maggie, if you don't mind, just if there's anything I should address in the moment, please flag it because I am not looking at the chat. So good morning, everybody. My name is Danielle Getzinger. I'm the CEO of Adapta. We're a KSU tab partner, and I'll be talking to you today about incorporating data throughout your grant application with special attention on the EJ Screen tool and CGEST. But first, let's start with the importance of data. I like to say that data makes things visible, actionable, and fundable. And this is really the goal here, is to be able to have this data that's backing your story that actually results in funding and results in the project being able to be implemented and the brownfields to be redeveloped. Data use guidelines. So I'm going to first go through some tips on how we're going to use the data throughout the grant application. Then we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty of finding the data. So some key guidelines for the EPA grants. The data must reinforce a compelling story. So start with that story first. Start with your storyline, and then find that data to back it and to have evidence to reinforce that story. Incorporate the data throughout your application. It's not just for the community needs section. It's not just in certain areas. It's throughout the entire application. You're going to be sprinkling data throughout it. Some sections will be more heavy than others, but you definitely need to sprinkle it throughout. You also need to balance that data. So if you're bringing up a community need, you're also going to need to say how your grant is going to satisfy that need. That is really important, and you will lose points if you bring up something about the community need and you don't solve for that problem on the back end. Using local and unique and qualitative data sources is not only okay, but it's really advisable. That a lot of times, especially in rural communities, it is difficult to find data representing your community. So that's where you're going to local sources. That can be surveys throughout the community. That can be news stories. That could be studies. That can be something other than the EJ Screen tool or the US Census. Throughout here, I have these little fun tips, tip boxes. I think you all know, Maggie just said, KSU tab is amazing. They do grant applications, and stay tuned for guidance from them. Another tip, and I heard this early on. At first, I didn't believe it, but it's really true. If they're asking and or statements, it's really and. Ignore the or. It's and. So as much as you can satisfy that and as opposed to and or. All right, so coming down into what we mean by the data must reinforce a compelling story. again, if your story is, about food insecurity in your neighborhood, there is a USDA maps that can back you up in a database that can demonstrate that yes, you are in fact in a food desert, low income, low access food area. But the community and the story that you're getting that from is really coming from the community. It's really coming from what you already know within your community. We're going to want to incorporate that data throughout your application. And historically, that has meant we have put things in a lot of tables. And as you'll see over the past few years, we as a general community have really come into more incorporating this data throughout the application, not just in these big tables. In fact, the EPA has said we don't necessarily want to see these tables anymore. We want to see it incorporated throughout the text. So the way that we're doing that is really just, bringing it into the sentences. So here's a couple of examples. KSU Tab has on their website the previous grants from probably the past 10, 20 years that have been successful. So if you just go back to the past couple of years and you look at those successful grants, you can find more examples of this and more different styles of how people are weaving data in throughout their application. Again, don't present data you haven't discussed in the narrative in some way. So if you're talking about persistent poverty, you're going to bring in that data. You're not just going to drop in data that you haven't put some text and some context around. With these tables, you can, if it makes more sense, you can put mini tables throughout this, as you're weaving everything in. So if for example, you have, some things that you're talking about within the context and within the text, you're also, you can pull in, the classic is the EJ screen, where you're just going to pull in a short, small table to support with that data. So those can be a little bit easier to fit into the page limit. And I would encourage you to take a look at some examples that are online for that. Again, like I said before, we're balancing the data need with the data outcomes. So what is your grant saying that you're going to end up doing after you say there's a community need? You should give us this money because we're going to solve that need. And so that need, the way some examples of that, if you're bringing up low unemployment rates, you're going to also bring up how many jobs you're creating. If you're bringing up low access to affordable housing, well, how many affordable housing units are you creating? Again, back to the food deserts. If there's a food desert, well, how are you going to then produce food and how are you going to bring food into the community? Climate factors, this is a big one. If you're saying you're in your extreme heat, you're in flooded areas, what are you doing on the other end? And bringing it in the EPA really wants to see the numbers behind it. You can say, well, we're going to reduce the heat effect. Do you have any data to say the trees will reduce the average temperature by X? They want metrics, they want that data. This can be estimated, this can be researched, but definitely try to do your best to incorporate some data to balance the data. That makes sense. Local studies are a great source of more reliable data, very localized and contextual data specifically for your community. This is a lot of studies from Houston. I'm based in Houston, so if you find that this is very Houston focused, there's a reason. I'm a little biased, but we have just a lot of studies that we've recently done here in Houston. And we've drawn a ton of information and data that you can't get really anywhere else because those are localized studies. Also, the quotes directly from news stories or community meetings that really paint a better picture and contextualize the data and reinforce your story are, I think, very powerful. And we're seeing more of that incorporated into grant applications. And we see that a lot on the environmental justice side. And we're incorporating that also into the Brownfield grants as well. So this is one example about illegal dumping in the city, and that being an issue. And we have the real data here of how many cases of illegal dumping annually, and what our plans are to abate that. But also this quote is, this is the top #1 issue they've had throughout the community. So that just reinforces it doesn't take up too much space, and it's a great way to just, again, reinforce that compelling story. So down to finding data, which is probably why you're here, because this is, we hear a lot, is the most overwhelming part of the grant application, hands down. So these are the steps, assuming that you've already found your target area, you know where you're going. The first thing that I would do, and I would recommend, is first go into the CGIS tool, the White House's Climate and Economic Justice Screening tool, because those are the Justice 40 census tracts that the White House is incentivizing all of the federal funding to benefit, or not all, 40% of the federal funding must benefit these communities. So we want to first know, are you in a CGIS census tract? Secondly, EJ Screen Tool, EPA's EJ Screen Tool has really gone from being a neat little tool to a very critical, powerful tool. They put a lot into that. I think we're on our 4th edition now, and it has a lot more information, a lot more power and capability. Not only is it a good resource, but the EPA wants to see you using a tool that they've invested a whole lot of time and money into. And then from there, explore other data sources. So again, the necessary data sources, that CGIS, EJ Screen, there is if you want to go straight to the US Census, you're going to be pulling census data, and you can do that through CGIS, you can do that through EJ Screen, you can do that actually through a whole bunch of different tools that you'll find. If you want to go directly to the US Census, they have updated their user interface to be a little bit more friendly. It is still overwhelming, and I say that as a company that does a lot with data. So we have some tips on how to navigate that if you want to go directly there, but just know that there's other options out there for you. Other key resources, FEMA, we have on our website, which I need to update because we just merged with Adapta, but on our website and on the KSU tab website, we've developed a peer tool, which is a platform for exploring environmental records, which could be a great resource for you for building that brownfields inventory, just knowing how many voluntary cleanup sites are in your community, how many underground storage tanks are in your community, how many chemical storage facilities are in your community, or to screen properties that are priority sites, so that you know what records either exist on the property or nearby the property. We have the flood hazard layer on FEMA directly. This is a US climate risk toolkit. That is an entire toolkit to explore, a website that will basically have a directory toward a whole bunch of different types of ways of evaluating climate vulnerability and risk. So you can check that out. There's a USGS Geologic Hazard Center, more FEMA tools, and USDA has a food atlas. So let's jump in first to the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. Again, this is going to be your first step. And this tool identifies those census tracts within the Justice 40 initiative, seeks to deliver 40% of the overall benefit of investments of climate, clean energy, and related areas to disadvantaged communities. So they categorize these tools. Not only do you see what are the census tracts, but you also get the categories of burden. So they're looking for vulnerability and burden within these census tracts relative to climate change, energy, health, housing, legacy pollution, transportation, water and waste, and workforce development. And just to understand the data, so this is a little kind of asterisk next to this. As I mentioned before, that the US Census data, you can go directly to it, but you can also get it through a number of different sites. keep in mind that those different sites may be pulling different data from the US Census. So you have your decadal census. Every 10 years, we're doing a big census effort. And then on a 5-year kind of basis, we're doing a survey to just kind of update some of those numbers. So some of the tools are pulling from the 2020 census. The CGIS tool is pulling from the 2010 census boundaries, and the rest of the tools, EJ Screen and others, are pulling from the 2020 or from a American survey, one of the 5-year surveys. So just if you're seeing that the data is not matching, if the census boundaries are not matching, you're not going crazy. The government's crazy. And these are just some inconsistencies. Try to use the most recent, and you can caveat that within your grant application that, based on the CGIS census boundaries, we have, this is identified as a CGIS census tract. And then when you're pulling from other ones, if there's inconsistencies, you can put it as a footnote if you want to get technical. So going into EJ Screen, and I can do a demo of these if we have some time, but going into EJ Screen, and actually this website here has been updated, and I didn't see that one until just now. So, but Google EJ Screen, you'll jump into it. And EJ Screen has a number of different ways of navigating. It's very user-friendly. And the way that I like to navigate, one, if you are looking for your census tract, and you are trying to make a decision based off of what has the more compelling story from a data perspective. And this is a great way to show some of those disparities in health, or environmental health and social disparities throughout your communities or throughout your city. This could be a great way to say, maybe we really should look a little bit deeper into this area over here. The way that once you find that you have a target area, or say you have a cleanup site and you want to put a radius around it, you have, if you navigate on this area over here, you have a reports button. And that report gives you several options. You can drop a pin and you can put a radius around that pin. You can draw an area. You can also select your census tracts. So you have a different ways to play with that. And then once you select that area, you can run a report, and that report will give you aggregated data for the area that you told it to pull from, with a whole lot of information about the demographics, information about the health disparities, information about the environmental risk in terms of environmental justice indicators. There's a lot to explore within that report. So I would definitely pull that report, because all of that information is something that you're going to need within your grant application. And there's neat little tables at the end showing where those disparities are, where the EJ indicators are relative to these, was it 11 indicators? It was 9 before, 13, it was 11, they added 2. And the reason why they have these specific indicators is because these were consistent in data sets throughout the country, allowing them to make a national index for these specific indicators. This is a little bit more of a breakdown of the report. And as you can see, it shows you on this what your target area, whatever you selected, is, what that value is relative to your state average and relative to the US average. So you can break it down as it relates to the state and to the US. If you wanted to also pull data for, say, your county, you can have that option within this. So oftentimes I will pull a report just for the county. I'll pull a report just for the city. And then I will look at that target area as well and pull a report for that. And so you then have 3 reports to look at and to pull data from, to demonstrate and to tell that story of the disparities in your community and why you're seeking funding. This is some additional indicators that they've added recently, pulling from the CDC. They're pulling in data around health indicators. We're pulling in, and they've added more here to the climate indicators, and then critical service gaps, which again, that food desert, that is pulling from the USDA. The transportation access is pulling from the DOT. So they're pulling from a whole lot of different resources and data sets, and synthesizing it in this one report. And again, you can also look at those these indicators on an individual basis and in a not in a tabular format, but in this map format as well. So we can go through. In addition to that, so that's everything that has been in that report. If you want to go deeper and say you wanted to know something specifically about housing or population, over here on that drop down, you'll have additional demographic information. So additional demographics, and you can then go through and explore specifically what data you want to pull to support the story that you're trying to tell. And again, this is far more navigable. Is that a word? This is easier to navigate than the US Census data. So I would start here and just note what census, what the source of the data is pulling from. So this is pulling from 2017 to 2021 American Census Survey. So aggregating, so say you have a large target area, and one of the things that's always driven me nuts is how do you aggregate all this data together? I have to go back to my statistics books. But one thing that kind of trick of the trade here is if you're telling a story about the target area, but within this target area, some of your priority sites are in specific census tracts that have disparities, that have high poverty rates or unemployment or whatever you're whatever community need you're trying to satisfy there. Within that, you can actually just go straight to that census tract. So for example, the way that we did this in Houston, which we're covering a very large target area, we are pulling in the specific census tract to reinforce and to tell that story. So instead of saying this entire census tract has an average income of X, actually there's the target area has a certain income of X. Sometimes that story gets lost if part of that census tract is pulling in more development, there's more affluent residents that are coming in, and it might not tell the story. So pulling in those specific census tracts to reinforce a story and to show that range, and obviously there is a range here in just the median income and what we're trying to demonstrate within that storyline. Other sources of data, again, we have FEMA, you have that US Census demographics data mapper. There is our peer tool, and again, I'm happy to jump into any of these. This is available on the KSU tab website. We also have another tool called ABC, Analysis of Brownfields Cleanup Costs. And that tool will tell you if you're putting together your budget and you want to know how much a phase one costs and you haven't worked with consultants before, that's a great tool to show the cost based off of the acres database that EPA has tracked for the past 25 years. Enviro Atlas is another great tool that you can check out. It's a little bit more of a power user interface, but certainly very powerful, where you can pull in different layers of different data sets throughout the country that may want to tell a story about wildfires or flooding or another data set that I haven't even thought of yet that could be more specific to either your state or your region. Health data is always a difficult thing to find because of our privacy laws, for good reason. But the CDC has published this great resource, which is actually, I believe, where EJ Screen pulls from in terms of replicating that data and showing it within that platform. So the CDC's platform will show you a number of different indicators here relative to health disparities. Again, we have asthma, we have cancer, we have high cholesterol. There's a number of indicators. Keep in mind that all of this data is better when there's a whole lot of people, just you have more to come from. So this does break down in rural areas, it breaks down in tribal territories. So complementing, if you are within a territory where you are within a rural area, you're going to want to complement this with some community surveys or more of that qualitative data of, you know, we've talked to the residents and they want this. Here's our story. You can bring up the data and you can call out the data does not reflect what we're seeing in our communities. And EPA knows that EJ screen kind of will break down a little bit once you get into the rural areas. So if there's something that sometimes it makes a whole lot of sense, and sometimes we had a tribe we were working with, and they were a high indicator for Superfund sites, and the guy said to me, he's like, we don't have any Superfund sites. And so yeah, this is one of those cases where you're going to just maybe either ignore that data or you're going to call it out and you're going to just put some context around it. If you're looking for climate vulnerability data, again, the U.S. Resilience Toolkit is a great source for that data. FEMA will have, of course, your flood data. USGS has other hazards. Explore that. EJ Screen does have a layer now for climate indicators. This is just more of that FEMA data and their resilience analysis and planning tools. USDA is known for their food low income, low access data set, where you can talk about and find data to support your story if you're in an area with food disparities, food access disparities. And again, local sources. Crime statistics will be at your, should be online. If you're in a city, it's fairly easy to find. If you are in a rural area, maybe call the fire chief and see if they can give a statement of, if there's a certain part of town or if there's a certain area where there's buildings that are attracting vandalism or any kind of crime associated with the brownfields. They might know that. Community surveys, again, master plans or revitalization plans or corridors, anything that was a public process to say, here's the disparities or the community need that we have and that we are observing, and here's some lived experiences of that. If that's documented anywhere, pull that in. Universities are a great place to go. Other research institutions, again, news stories, and then straight up just interviews with some of the local officials and community leaders that represent the people. More data here, if you want some more data. I think the slide deck will be shared with everybody, so we can, you'll have access to that. And then we also, within the slide deck, have put together that US data guide, where you're going to go and follow these steps if you do want to find specific data within the census tracts. You do need to know what census tracts you're working with. That's an easy thing to find in EJ Screen. There is a mapping feature of the US Census, so you should be able to find that. And you can go into specific surveys. So for example, if you're going to look up income poverty, if you're looking at household income, it's going to be under income and poverty, income and earnings, housing income. The reason why this is so complicated is because we have so many different categories of the way that we slice and dice our demographic data. So you kind of have to just tease through and wade through all of those different options. But once you get there, it will give you, again, not very user-friendly, but if you're able to find it, scroll down through until it gets to the right spot, and then you can download the table and hopefully get a little bit better control of the data once it's in Excel. This is just a comparison of the census data versus EJ Screen. I do like EJ Screen a lot more. I think that from a just user-friendly, most grant writers are gonna gravitate to EJ Screen. If you're a power user and you want to explore census, or then dive into it. But most of that data you can find directly in EJ Screen. Okay, I'm going to stop there and see if we have questions, if you want me to do any live demos, or anything.
I do not see any questions in the chat right now. Kate, how are
Okay.
we on time? Is there time for a live demo?
We are doing great on time. We can go ahead and get started with a live demo. Danielle, you have until
About
10 o'clock.
minutes,
So we've got 23 minutes, 22 minutes.
Okay, all right. I bring this up, so to get to EJ Screen, it's dash mapper. Oops, that's Facebook. Never mind. There it is. Let me put that in the chat. Make sure everybody has that. So, okay. Well, I'm in Houston, and I know a lot of you are not in Houston. You guys are all somewhere else. Let's go into, let's go into Denver. So we wanted to go into Denver and say, I don't know where our target areas should be. So let's look at the demographic index and see where we might start be pulling in some disparities that the data is picking up on. Okay, so this area of town, this area, is there a correlation with race? Seems to be a bit. Income levels. Okay, unemployment rates, kind of narrowing into here. If we wanted to then look at environmental justice indicators and just explore the data, we're looking at that. Again, this area right in here is where I'm starting to zone in on. I'm gonna say lead paint. Proximity to a Superfund site. Boom. Okay. Sometimes the data really aligns and points you to the same place. In other places, it's all over the place. So again, what is the vision? Why are you going after brownfields funding? Is it economic development? Is it housing? Is it brownfields to health fields? Could be a whole bunch of different reasons. Okay, so let's go into climate change. Flood risk. Are we aligning with flood risk? There's not as much flood risk in that area. Yeah. Okay. So that's just a easy way of exploring this data. We can look at the healthcare disparities. Are those overlapping? Oh. I don't know if it's updating. Lack of health insurance data. Okay, not reachable. Good to know. Food insecurity, housing and transportation access, housing burden, my guess is probably going to align in that same type of area. Yep. Okay. So let's go into, let's just say we're going to drop a pin. Let's say that this is a brownfield site. Okay. We're going to put a buffer of a mile around it. You can go to kilometers too. So, but say either a mile, or I think a mile is probably a good radius. And then we create that report. So I would do this if I were going after a cleanup grant and say that was the site that we wanted to clean up. And now we're seeing that this is a lower income, but it's in the 47th percentile, so not significantly. There's a 77% people of color, average life expectancy 78. We just kind of scan that data, number of households within that radius, per capita income, that is fairly low. And if we get down into the EJ indicators, we're showing that this is an area that has higher than average exposure to particulate matter, ozone, all of the indicators. So this is definitely defined as the EJ community, and the supplemental indicators. So EJ indicators pull together both the demographic information and the proximity to. Then they break it down a little bit more detail into those socioeconomic indicators and then the environmental burden. So the EJ indicator is both the socioeconomic and the environmental burden kind of combined in a fancy statistical way. But know that this is a breakdown of that. So they want to know not only is there exposure to the environmental burden, but is that disproportionately affecting people of lower income, people of color, and other sensitive populations. So again, we're seeing that this is all very high in the 90s, 80s. So I would make a table just saying I would stay in the grant application. We're in EJ, all of the grant, all of the EJ indicators and supplemental indicators demonstrate that we are well above average at a 99th percentile, with the lowest being 83 compared to the state. And then you can break it down a little bit further if you want to go into more details. Say the issue is the proximity to traffic, and we want to make this a more walkable neighborhood. We want to decrease traffic flow. You're going to pull in that data. And down here is where you get a little bit higher. Obviously, the wildfire risk we would expect to be fairly high within Colorado, but the state average is 33. So, again, national average is 14. We would expect Colorado to be much higher than the US average. And then this community is slightly higher. So there could be a reason for that. Broadband internet. They are clearly in need of broadband internet. The state average is 9%, and this area around the site is 20. Lack of health insurance, which is curious that they didn't have that aggregate data when I clicked on it, but we got that data here. Household burden, they're showing no, so we'll have to investigate that. Transportation access and food desert, yes. So both of those are disparities. You can go deeper into that food insecurity on that USDS website if you wanted to. What else do we have? If you wanted to, this is the CGIS tool. So if you go to the climate and economic justice screening tool, and I don't know where that site was, but this is actually not too far away. And you click on that census tract. We'll say that the site, which may have been right in this area, was in the census tract. And the census tract you're going to say is a CGIS defined. But when you go to the right here, you're going to be able to show what the risk is, what the vulnerability is. So not only low income, but also projected wildfire risk. Right. So that's a major climate driver in this area. Loss of building, the risk of the loss of buildings probably because of that wildfire. Is there good there? This clearly shows up bold because of again, those EJ indicators are showing that they're very high here. So proximity to the risk management plans is one of those EJ indicators, proximity to Superfund sites, and low income. So the combination of those two is why they're flagging that. Workforce development, low to median income, and then also low high school education attainment rate. So that's something that is also noteworthy of why this is a Justice 40 census tract. You can talk about the other ones. Again, what is your compelling story? Is this aligned with that compelling story? And how is your project going to satisfy this community need or help move the community in a direction that that solves for this problem. Okay. Let me show you these two tools as well. So this is the platform for exploring environmental records. This was created using funding from data.org in collaboration with Kansas State University. It is available and free to use. This just says that this is pulling all of the environmental records that are available at the EPA, which also includes state level records that the states share with the EPA. There's some disparities between some states don't share all of their records with the EPA. Don't ask me why, I've asked, but it's apparently very complicated on why we can't just share everything. But so if there could be more data out there, is what I'm saying. But this is a pretty good amount of data that should give you, let's see, in this area, let's just zoom in. Should pop up. This is just saying that there are 231 facilities in this area. Those records are known as facilities. It's just updating here. The little dots should show here in a minute. I need some music going so the dots will show. There we go, dots. Okay, so the way that you can navigate this, I don't know what building we picked, but say we picked a building over here, and clearly those are above ground storage tanks. So that makes sense. Yeah, that's a Denver refinery. And we have broken this out into a risk rating. And if you go to the about section, you can, it'll talk about what that risk means. A risk of 3 is of high volume storage of hazardous waste or petroleum. And if you know that there's petroleum or hazardous waste or substances on site, there is a risk or a chance that that could have leaked onto your property. So that's a notable finding. You can also break this out into environmental interest and come down here to the show filter data. And you have all of the categories of environmental interest. So if you say select none, but you want to know where all the Superfund sites are, here's where the Superfund sites, as reported on the national priority list or in SIMS database. So, if you're going to talk about your community is overburdened and there are a higher indicator of Superfund sites, but you want to know actually how many Superfund sites are there. Here they are. They're all in this area. And now you have more data to say they're within a 1 mile radius. You can measure here, within a certain radius, there's this many Superfund sites, for example. So play with the data. The other one, I'm almost out of time, but not really, is the analysis of Brownfield's costs. Once you get down to your budget, and you want to know how much is a phase 1, how much is a phase 2, and you can feel free to come to here. This explores 25 years of EPA's data. So if you want to, my favorite, you can look at single variables. My favorite would be going to the geographic area and say we wanted to come into a site location. Let's see some location summary. Let's go to phase 1s over here. And let's go by metropolitan. Well, you can go by state. Say you just wanted to go to Colorado. Okay, so now in all of Colorado, you can see that an average phase 1 costs $4,300 per EPA, per the EPA funding. If you want to go down to the local map, you can see exactly where those phase 1s have been performed. Some of them higher than others, but again, this is pulling from all from the EPA's data. And you might have, maybe there's a consultant that says we can do that for, on average 3,000 or 2,000. Others might say 5,000. This just gives you some data that is not biased by any one consultant. But if you do want to go into a specific area, so let's go into one city. Where are we going to go? So I'm say Denver. Let's go into the Denver area. And then we want to know how much a phase one costs here. We go into the location summary, and the average cost is at $39,000. And if you wanted to, this is another, you can compare that with similar cities based off of cost of living, population, or population density, to really further analyze that data. And up to 10. So play with that if that is useful for you. And it may be just useful to call up your consultant. But if you don't have one, or you want an unbiased opinion, this is a great way to do that cost analysis. Is there anything else that I can dive into? U.S. Resilience Toolkit. That one's another one of my go-tos. Thinking about that and where to, under tools, browse all tools, and you can find all kinds of good stuff, you know, Adapt Alaska, stormwater management. There's all kinds of data sets that are related to climate risk, vulnerability, that may be applicable to you. So much data, so much fun. Do we have any questions?
There are no questions in the chat currently. Danielle,
Okay.
can you talk about where you would recommend communities to start?
First I would start with going to, oh, is it not up here anymore? The CGIS. Go to CGIS first. No, that's not it. CGIS. There we go. Go here first to know whether or not you're in a Justice 40 census tract. And then understand what the burden is on that census tract. And then I would go to EJ Screen and I would pull all of the reports from EJ Screen and start there. Also, as you're going through and you're understanding what story you're telling, why are you going after this grant? Why did you select the target area? Once you understand that, then map out what data you think is going to be useful to back that story, and then go find that data. So it's going to be very overwhelming if you just go out there and find all of the data, because you might not need to use all of that data. So you're really going on a hunt for the data that's going to back your story and back why you are doing what you're doing. You may discover new things too. You know, you may discover that that the community is in a food desert, and that could be something that you incorporate into community visioning or into programming within a brownfield site. So you might discover new things, but I think in most cases, people are coming to these at the point that you're going after a grant application, knowing generally what the need is, and the community already knows what the data says. Go to your community, say, what are the needs here? And then you can find that data to back it.
Awesome, thanks. I'll add one thing, and that's, I know Danielle mentioned this, but look at other communities near where you are, see how they framed their narrative, and see if you can, draw some inspiration from that. So for example, Danielle, you were looking at Commerce City, which is actually, it's a community, it's an actual city in the Denver metro area. And as you saw, very heavy environmental burden. The Suncor refinery has received numerous, it's always in the news for violating air quality standards. So the city of Brighton, which is very close to Commerce City, applied for a Brownfield grant this past year. So I would encourage communities to, reach out to neighboring communities you've spoken with, have applied for EPA Brownfield grants, see what they've done, review their application. And even if they're not near you, you can look through the list of successful grants in our on our KSU Tab website, and you can just look at communities that have a similar story to yours, whether that's size and demographics or the type of environmental burden they're facing. These are all great places to read for, or great things to read for inspiration as you begin pulling data.
Yeah, I will echo that. Definitely go back to those successful grants and read through it, see how they've incorporated data, knowing that the EPA selected them. They were awarded, so they did it right. There's different styles and ways to incorporate that data in, and maybe some other sources that haven't been presented here that would have been in their grant application. I do cite, and you can use a footnote for those citations of where you're getting the data. Definitely cite it. Make sure that you know where, where you pulled it from. If you say, downloaded from EJ Screen on this date, or, US Census data from this survey, or this, the 2020 census. And if you have questions about EJ Screen, there's a whole bunch of user videos, tutorials, etc. I just dropped this into the link. This is the technical document that backs where things are coming from. And what I get a lot of questions about, what is a percentile? How are we interpreting this data? This is actually, although it says a technical document, it is fairly straightforward. It answers a whole lot of questions about where the data is coming from, why, and how you can interpret the percentiles and other things.
Are there any other questions from the audience? You can either drop them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask them out loud.
So I've either just really just confused everybody with so much data, or you guys got it. And I'm gonna go with you guys got it. And KSU Tab is of course always here if you need some guidance on data.
Yes, and I will add one thing and say, if you don't want to go through our website and comb through all the grants from all 49 other states that you're not located in, and you say, you can send us an email and say, hey, I live in a community that is 10,000 people and we're facing these issues, and we can at least bounce it around within our staff and hopefully identify a couple comparable ones so that it's a little bit of a less overwhelming lift for you all to find communities that are similar. Okay, well, Danielle, thank you so much for your time today. This was such a great conversation, and I personally have never used the analysis of Brownfield's cost tool, and I think that that's super helpful and will be very informative for folks as they're building their budgets, which is something we're going to talk about in a little bit. But before we get into that, we are going to do a quick overview of the Tab EZ tool. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and pass it over to Maggie to take it away on Tab EZ.
Great, thank you. So Tab EZ is a grant writing tool that just can help you navigate the grant guidelines for all the grants being offered in each year. And we'll kind of just walk through briefly what it is and how to set it up and use it. So to access the Tab EZ tool, you can visit ksutab.org and click on the eTools header at the top of the page. You will need a ksutab.org account to be able to log into the eTools. Kate put a message in the chat earlier, to access the sample grant applications, to access the PowerPoints and webinar recordings from today's event, you do not need to be logged in. You do need to be logged in to access Tab EZ or the Brownfields inventory tool. And that's because the data that is in these tools is yours as a user. Only you have access to it. We'll talk about you can share information with another participant or user if you'd like, but it's your data. So you do need to have an account so you can log in securely to use these tools. Once you're logged in, you can click the button. There's like a yellow button at the top to start a new grant application. And then there's also on the main page, just a quick brief overview of how you can get started with your grant application. So once you're in and you've started your grant application, you will want to create a new application, and you just select the application type. For this year, the grants being offered are community-wide assessment, coalition assessment, community-wide assessment for states and tribes, cleanup, and a revolving loan fund. So you would just select from one of those options, and then you want to give your application a name. Whatever is unique to this particular grant year or cycle that you are applying for. A couple things to think about as you're using Tabby Z, or if anybody's going to follow along. If you already have an account and you want to log in, that's great. Just keep in mind that right now, Tabby Z is set up with the fiscal year 24 guidelines. We are currently in the process of updating with the fiscal year 25 guidelines. And we will make a message and a note about that when those are complete. We are anticipating to have the guidelines updated and ready to go for this year's competition by middle of next week, hopefully by Wednesday, September 18th. Tabby Z, once you are working within Tabby Z, there's lots of reminders and helpful hints, links to federal resources. Also, at Tabby Z, there's also access to a tutorial and an online video to walk you through how to get started and use the tool. There's also quick links at the bottom, as you can see, to direct links to some of our sample grant applications that we have available. So once you've created your application, you start with the overview page. The overview page just provides some basic information about the type of grant that you are applying for. And in this case, it's a coalition assessment grant. But then the next step, you will want to actually configure your application. So you'll click Application Configuration, and then you will be taken to this page. And this page just kind of helps you, again, it helps configure the outline that you will follow for your grant application. And it also just gives you kind of a quick eligibility kind of threshold check. So depending on the type of grant you will be applying for, there's several questions that you will ask. As you'll note, that's highlighted in yellow. Information that is selected under application configuration is automatically generated into certain sections of the grant, that's relevant to how you answered that question. So if you make any changes on the application configuration page, it will affect and change then the grant outline that you'll have available to you to actually write your grant narrative. After you answer all the questions, you just go down to, save the configuration at the bottom or save and continue, and it'll take you to the next steps. So once you have you selected the type of grant you wanted to apply for, and you configured the application by answering those kind of threshold questions, the next piece of Tabby Z is it develops an outline. It develops an outline for the narrative information sheet. It develops an outline for the narrative and ranking criteria, and it evaluates a narrative or an outline for the threshold criteria for the type of grant you selected. In this presentation, we're going to kind of walk through the threshold, and you can see here the outline that is created for a coalition assessment grant under threshold that was built and generated based on your selections that you made. And essentially, you'll just follow each of the outline sections that appears on the left-hand side of Tabby Z, and then you kind of write on the right-hand side. When you're all done, you can export to Word and do any final formatting, editing, proofreading, and things like that. So here's just some examples of what the threshold criteria outline looks like for the various types of grants. You can see for like a community-wide assessment grant, the outline is pretty simple. And then, cleanup grant has a lot more threshold type information that you have to provide. And then the narrative ranking criteria for coalition assessment grant. So essentially what Tab Easy does is it puts all the information into one section. So you have your outline here on the left, as you can see. It provides an overview of each of the grant sections and subsections. It includes the information, the ranking criteria. It also includes the evaluation criteria for that particular section. Is that what the next slide shows, Kate? Yeah. So you can see here, in subsection, 1A, identify the geographic boundaries. That is the actual ranking criteria. So that is section 4 of the grant guidelines. And then we also include the evaluation criteria, which is section 5 of the guidelines. And while most of the time, the ranking criteria and the evaluation criteria, they should align very, very well. Sometimes when you read through the guidelines, the wording might be slightly different. And so what Tab Easy does is it just puts them both together in one space, so you can see the ranking criteria, you can see how that ranking criteria is going to be evaluated, and then you have a text box, and that is where you would draft your narrative to address that particular, ask or ranking criteria. You can see there's several options for doing text. You can, format some of the font. You can save it if you want to come back to the section. If you just save it, because let's say you want to come back, you'll notice the outline on the left-hand side, the circle for that particular section is only half full. That just lets you know when you're in there and you're working that, oh, hey, I haven't completed this section yet. If you complete the section and you hit save and complete, then that entire circle will be completely full. For blank circles, that just means on the outline, you need to go in and put in some text to address that particular criteria. Next slide. For a majority of the grant guidelines, within Tab EZ itself, we also have separate like helpful hints. And so there will be a helpful hint link at the bottom of the evaluation criteria that you can see here. And what that does is it'll link to a separate helpful hint resource that we create. And it just provides some additional tips or food for thought, items to consider when you're addressing that criteria. And so that's really helpful as you're working to address each of the criteria for the grant guidelines. Not all, well, I'd have to, I guess, go look. But I'm not going to promise there may not be a helpful hint for every single criteria, because some criteria is pretty straightforward. There's not much more to say about it, especially in the narrative information sheet and some other things. But for other areas, if you see the helpful hints in blue within Tab EZ, click on that, and then that's just some additional information to help you address that criteria. Actually, go back one sec. I want to. We have a question in the chat that says, if an organization has a login account, can multiple employees within that organization log in at the same time? The answer to that question is yes. Yes, if you have a single account, but multiple people want to log into that account, you can do that. It would just be, I guess, mindful of what, your colleagues are doing, so you're not overlapping or duplicating. A couple things that are built within Tab EZ that can help with that are down here at the bottom, you can see the words add comment, and you can also see then view section revisions. So if you were to click on add comment, a box comes up and you can actually type in a comment. So you could even say to your colleague, hey, Julie, I've completed this section, or I started this section, but we need X, Y, and Z. So that add comment feature is a way to communicate with other maybe collaborators on your grant. If you click the view section revisions, that actually lists all the revisions. It timestamps it and date stamps it. So you can actually see users that went in and made updates at what time. So that can kind of help with the flow. You'll also notice on the left-hand side, kind of the outline right above grant content, it says manage participants. That is a way for you to add additional collaborators or additional users to collaborate on a single application. So let's say there are multiple people within your organizations that have their individual, KSU tab accounts. One person can set up a grant application, and then you can use that manage participants feature to add additional users. And then again, it's just a collaborative space where multiple people can work. You can still add comments. You can see who made what edits when by clicking on the view section revisions at the bottom.
Maggie, just to clarify, when you are managing participants, do those people all need to have KSU tab accounts?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yep.
It looks like we've got a couple more questions in the chat. I can read them to you if that's easier.
Yeah. Okay. Should we wait until the guidelines are updated to fiscal year 25 to begin? Yes, I would wait. And like I said, we anticipate having Tab Easy ready to go with fiscal year 25 guidelines by Wednesday of next week. It might be close of business Wednesday, so maybe wait and check back Thursday morning. In the meantime, if you are new to Tab Easy, though, it doesn't hurt to maybe go in now and explore and just get a feel for it. And if you do type any information in there, you can always export the document to Word and then, copy and paste back in or use it that way.
I will also add, we're doing all of our updates in a production setting. So it will all be updated at once. There will not be a situation where half the guidelines are for FY 2025 and half are for FY 2024. So by Thursday morning of the 19th, everything should be updated with FY 25 data. Another thing you can do is look at the grant guidelines in the long PDF format. And as Danielle mentioned, start collecting your data, even if you're just kind of compiling that and then you're waiting for Tab Easy to be updated to start drafting your actual narrative. There's stuff you can do in the meantime.
Yeah. And then yes, once the fiscal year 25 updates have been made, we will release a newsletter or an email just saying, hey, Tab Easy is updated. So while it's not required to have a KSU Tab account to access any of the information outside of eTools, I would strongly encourage or recommend anybody to go ahead and sign up, which if you registered for this event, you should have a Tab account because that automatically adds you to our listserv. And so when we make announcements like Tab Easy's updated or here's some upcoming events, just anything that we're doing, you'll get a notice via email about that. Let's see. Can a grant writer use this tool for various clients, or does the applicant need to set up an account that the grant writer can use? No, if you're a grant writer assisting communities, you 100% absolutely can use this tool. You would just create or configure an application per each client, and then you could use that participant feature to add your client as a participant so they can see what you're doing. And if there's maybe certain sections that they need to have input on or provide feedback on, then they can do that within the tool itself. And then you're not, emailing documents back and forth or doing, shared documents that could sometimes, just run into trouble. So 100%, yeah, it's a easy tool to use, but it's also generated or intended to be a collaborative space for multiple people to work on a single grant application.
And I think, Maggie, when you're managing participants, you are managing participants for that grant application only. You are not managing participants for your entire account. So if you're working on 3 different grant applications and you invite the city to each city gets invited to their grant, they will not be able to see the other grants.
Correct. Yep. Very good point.
Okay, well, we are about a minute behind, Maggie, so
Okay.
let's go ahead and move
Yeah,
on and we can
let's just
cover
keep
any questions.
going.
Oops, sorry.
Yep. So this is just an example. Like I said, after you address all the criteria and you've typed your narrative into the text box, you can export to a Word document. And then here's kind of what it looks like when you export to Word. So it includes the section number and the title, which is very important for the reviewers. And then you can go in and make additional edits if you want to reduce the spacing or you want to change maybe the italicize or whatever you want to do. You can make final edits after it's exported into Word. And that's tab easy.
Thanks, everybody. We are going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break. So let's reconvene at 10:22. And we will get started with the grant walkthrough of sections 3 and 4 of the grant guidelines. As soon as I have confirmation from our panel speakers today, I think we will go ahead and get started. So Maggie and Wade, when you're ready, just turn on your cameras and unmute yourself and we can start with our panel. Okay, so during last week's webinar, we looked at sections 1 and 2 of the grant, which are the general grant narrative and the community needs sections. If you missed last week's webinar or you want a refresher as you've been drafting, again, that webinar has been recorded and posted to the KSU tab event page for this event. That link should have been dropped in the chat a few comments back. So if you scroll up, you should be able to find that pretty easily to access that recording. Today, we're going to be talking about sections 3 and 4, which are the task descriptions, cost estimates, and measuring successes, and then programmatic capability and past performances. Okay. All right, so a quick overview of the points per grant. And you can see today the 2 sections we're looking at are highlighted at the bottom. There's a slight difference between the amount of points that can be awarded per section, depending on which grant you're applying for. But overall, the structure of these applications is almost identical between the community-wide assessment, assessment coalition, cleanup, and RLF. There may be a little bit of a difference between how they're framing things. And for the RLF and cleanup, there are a couple additional things that they ask for that we're going to cover today as well. Okay, so section 3, task descriptions, cost estimates, and measuring progress. So we have our outline here. You can see task 3 has A, B, and C. So we're looking at a description of tasks, activities, and outputs. The great news, this section starts to get a little bit shorter than the previous 2 sections. You're nearing the end of the grant, you're over halfway. And the great news is that items I through IV, those can all be combined into a table. So you don't have to worry about putting things into quite as eloquent language. You can kind of abbreviate things and use that table to help make your narrative flow. The second part will be cost estimates. This is a great place to look at that ABC tool that Danielle demoed for us a few minutes ago, and to use information that you get there to help inform some of the data that you're inputting here in your grant application. And then the final section is your plan to measure and evaluate environmental progress and results. Okay, so as I mentioned, you can put this data into a table. And so this is kind of a little summary. So for tasks and activities, that is the what question. So what are you planning to do with this grant funding? I'll cover some eligible activities here in a minute, but things like community engagement, the actual assessment or cleanup or planning, those are all eligible tasks. Implementation asks you to describe how you are going to accomplish those tasks. So, what are you going to be doing to move those things forward? The schedule is the when question. So you need to specify at what time during your grant performance period you are planning to accomplish that task or begin that task. Lead is asking who, so typically that's going to be your internal team, but it'll also oftentimes involve consultants or your qualified environmental professionals, community leads. Those people can all help accomplish the tasks that are described in section 3. And then outputs are the metrics. So what exactly is going to be coming out of this grant, these grant funds? And the EPA does really like to see very quantifiable and measurable outputs for each of these, for each of your tasks. So this is building off a little bit of what we talked about last week. Your project description and your community needs and engagement, those will inform. So all of the things that you talked about, what Danielle just mentioned in terms of identifying data to support your story and your ask for this grant funding, that all goes and informs the actual tasks that you're proposing to perform, as well as the budget and what you talk about in terms of the money that you're asking for. So the task descriptions all inform or result in the tasks that you actually accomplish. So engagement, planning, assessment, and cleanup, those are all options, but there's other things you can do as well. And then that all leads into the outputs and outcomes, which is what the EPA is looking at as a measurable a measure of success for your grant. Basically a summary of what I said. Money talks, BS walks, always best to be very intentional with this section and to make sure that what you're saying that you're going to accomplish is actually feasible. Okay, so a description of tasks and activities and outputs. We talked about this a little bit last week, but based on the type of grant that you apply for, you can perform different types of activities. So for all grants, you can do things that are associated with program management. So procurement, reporting, management of financial and other records, having progress meetings internally or with your consultant. Those are all eligible regardless of the type of grant that you apply for, as well as health monitoring. That's an eligible activity for all the grants. And other administrative costs, although those do have a limit on the total amount of the award that can be used for those activities. For assessment grants, they are fairly wide and flexible. You can conduct brownfield site inventories, select sites to conduct environmental assessments on, perform community engagement to get feedback from the community as to which sites are most important to them. You can conduct those phase 1 and phase 2 investigations. I believe that you must spend at least 50% of your assessment funding on the actual environmental site assessments, whether that's a phase 1, phase 2, or hazardous building material survey. You can also conduct cleanup and reuse planning for getting these sites redeveloped, so taking them all the way to the point of applying for cleanup funding. And then you can also conduct some planning activities, so area-wide plans, market studies, infrastructure evaluations. Those are all eligible activities. And the EPA does have a pretty exhaustive list of eligible planning activities that they have on their website. With cleanup grants, they have a little bit of a narrower scope, so you are really limited to planning for the cleanup and reuse of a site. And that's really narrowing down and getting a more well-defined plan for reuse and cleanup. When you apply for these cleanup funds, you do need to have a very good idea. So you're just nailing down the details and not reuse planning. You can also conduct community engagement. And then obviously the actual implementation of cleanup and the oversight of those activities. You can also use it to purchase environmental insurance. And then with RLF grants, you are pretty much limited to loans and sub-grants to carry out those cleanups as well as those administrative costs. Okay, so project implementation. This is where you are asked to discuss the EPA-funded tasks and activities that will take place under the grant. And then, if applicable, identify other resources that will be, or identify tasks and activities that will be contributed by sources other than the EPA grant. So this is where, if you are planning on using KSU Tab or another planning or technical assistance firm to help maybe conduct some community engagement or reuse planning, this is where you can talk about how those partners are going to contribute to your grant and help leverage additional funding for your project. You can also obviously describe the tasks, and primarily what you're describing here are the tasks that you will be conducting under this grant with the funding itself. The most common pitfalls here are a poor description of tasks and lack of milestones. So again, something that's very broadly applicable with these EPA grants. You need to be specific, you need to be very descriptive, you need to be providing measurable results. However, things change. Brownfields take a long time to redevelop. And so if you are awarded this grant funding, oftentimes, if these things aren't able to happen, you're not going to be punished or, scolded for not meeting these tasks, as long as you're being realistic in what you're describing. But the EPA understands that things can change. You can also overcommit yourself, and this is the big one. So making sure that what you're asking for is realistic with the amount of money that you're asking for, as well as the time that you were given to complete your tasks. And being just very specific with your project schedule. Again, you won't be penalized if you do not accomplish that schedule, as long as what you're proposing is realistic. They're pretty understanding if there are things that come up that just don't kind of take you off track. Anything to add to this one, Maggie, before we?
No, I think that's, I would say that I think the biggest one for this is, just be clear, concise, and realistic in what you're describing, and you should be good to go.
Mm-hmm. Okay, project schedule. This is pretty straightforward. Discuss the anticipated schedule and timing for the EPA funded activities outlined above. So this is where you're saying we will accomplish this task in this amount of time. So again, be specific with your schedule. Make sure that there are some things that will be going on throughout the lifespan of your grant. So things like a brownfields inventory will begin early on in your grant cycle. You're going to be identifying sites at the beginning, but you will probably continue to revise and expand that inventory as ownership changes, as these sites are actually assessed. As new ones come online, these are all things that will continue to evolve. You also need to make sure that your schedule of tasks is logical. So you can't have your consultant perform work before you issue the RFP for that consultant. So I would, this is one of those things, you're copying and pasting things around. You may have been just spending too much time with this grant application. It's always great to have KSU Tab review your grant for just these kind of nitpicky consistency things. You can also maybe ask somebody in your organization who is, a logical and detailed person to just take a look and look for this sort of thing that is sometimes very missable if you're just too deep into the weeds on these grant applications. So something you can do now as you're waiting for the Tab EZ tool to get updated is to research how long these activities take and to draft your schedule. I feel like I sound like a broken record, but another great thing to do is to look at what existing communities have done and, see how long that they're expecting it will take them to complete their brownfield inventory or their cleanup or their reuse planning. All of these things are very common activities under these grants, and I'm sure you will be able to find examples of how long is a reasonable timeframe for these. Okay, final bit here of this section are the task and activity lead and outputs. So again, pretty straightforward. Identify the lead that's going to be overseeing each of these activities, and then identify and quantify as appropriate the anticipated outputs and deliverables for each task or activity. So just making sure that you're providing justification for a different project lead if you're talking about phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments, and the person who's managing your grant is a planner like Wade. Wade's very smart. I'm sure he could manage that, but he's probably going to be relying on his QEP to be doing the lead on those more technical assessments for that particular task. You need to make sure that your outputs match the tasks that you're describing. So again, consistency and just making sure, you may be editing your table and things get a little bit messed up. Make sure that things are in order and have that, logical and detail-oriented person review your grants. You also need to make sure that you are consistent throughout your grant with those outputs. So you may talk earlier in your community need or your project description somewhere else in your grant about the number of grant or sites that you're planning to assess or clean up. Just make sure that you're being consistent throughout your grant application, because all of that is really boiled down into this table. And then make sure your outputs are achievable within existing capacity or technology or constraints within your community. And right now is a great time to start looking into these resources that are needed to produce outputs. So this is an example from the City of Pueblo's multi-purpose grant from last year. Wade, I didn't take all of your tasks and activities, but I grabbed a couple of the ones. So I thought you would just, let us know if you have any thoughts on developing your descriptions for each of these.
No, I think it's pretty good. It was, we learned a lot from our first community assessment. So we're pretty lucky that we'd had an earlier version of this, and I was absolutely green to all of this. I feel like after 3 years, like I'm just kind of getting up to speed with the acronyms and all the tasks, and actually be able to give some meaningful feedback to our consultant. And we worked on this grant, but I think everything you said is really spot on, and just, you need to have strong leads to get the grant, I think, but then just also allow some flexibility, because you're going to start on projects and start on things you want to do, and they may not come to fruition. So I think this is a pretty good overview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can see here how they've responded to each of the 4 bullet prompts of this section that we just reviewed. So looking at the implementation, the schedule, the lead, and the output, all very important. One thing to note here, you can see with the task and activity lead for grant administration, they've mentioned the city planning and community economic development department director, as well as the senior city planner. We really recommend having at least 2 internal people acting as the lead on each of these tasks. That way, if there's turnover in those departments, you have somebody who's ready to pick up the flag and carry it forward. The last thing you want is for, your senior city planner to leave and for the project to totally stall out. So making sure that there's 2 leads, that there's 2 people who are involved, as well as any consultants and other partners. Okay, so this is a community engagement task, which is a big part of a lot of these grants. Wade, any thoughts, especially about the schedule for this sort of task, and how you came to these time frames?
Yeah, I think so. Based on, we'd had an earlier one, but I think if you're a smaller community, you build off of what you already have going on. And I think the EPA understands this, especially this task is going to be tailored to different communities. If you're a town of 10,000 people or 5,000 people, it's going to be way different than Pueblo at 100,000 people. So we built off kind of what worked, and just kind of knowing, I think you were saying, just be realistic with your timelines. I'm trying to be really ambitious as we're, rolling this one out. And even that is not, we're hitting snags with internal departments trying to get things approved through city council. So I think the EPA understands if you're going to take a while, but with the engagement task, we learned we didn't do a very good job in the very beginning of our engagement, and then we picked it up by the end. And so we kind of knew that this is going to take a while to get under contract and then hire the consultant, and probably be a little bit of a lag just reassembling people. And ours is a 5-year timeline, so we've got plenty of time to do this. But just I didn't aim for the first 3 months of the grant. I aim more for like 6 months, like let's get everything under contract, get the consultant, And then just acknowledge in the grant that you're going to kind of ease into something, but it's going to take probably 6 months to get it going.
Yeah, and this is one I think especially communities say, oh, we're going to do as much community engagement as possible. We'll have monthly meetings. We'll be sending out newsletters all the time. And it is easy to underestimate how much time and effort it takes to prepare those materials and to schedule and prep for a community meeting.
And
so, yeah.
It's, I worked on this one and then I worked on another one in Fremont County, a little more remote. And this stuff is kind of strange to people, so it can take a lot longer to do community engagement. If you're coming out and saying, we're going to get $1 million to tear down a building, everybody's for it, but people don't understand the kind of nomenclature of brownfields. So even in a city like Pueblo has a lot of struggles, I think it took a while to get people to understand why they would spend any time to do this. But I think once if you have somebody who's a point person who's engaging people, they tend to get it, but it can take a long time. It took us a long time to really even get our Brownfields Advisory Committee really together in meeting. And that was one thing we were a little short on, but the EPA project manager was kind of understanding. And so this time we kind of realized that we were going to put more effort into this early on, but also kind of allow for a little bit of flexibility.
Yeah, those are some great lessons learned. Okay, environmental assessments here. So Wade, will you maybe talk about how your task and activity lead here? Yeah, just how that works.
And applying for the grant, I think what you said, Kate, is pretty spot on, is you really want to work with Kate and KSU TAB to kind of, or if you already have an environmental consultant that you worked with in the past or that you've hired to kind of help you write the grant, to really kind of figure out cost schedules and things like that. And then not, like you said earlier, don't overshoot the amount that you're going to do. I don't think you get penalized for success by the EPA. So if you aim for 5 and you get 15, they're going to be delighted. But if you aim for 20 and get 2, somebody's going to be pretty frustrated. But I think the other thing is just really flexible with the money. So if you aim for 15 and you realize some other this one critical site has come to fruition and it's going to take some more money, they're generally pretty flexible about switching some money around, so you're not really stuck in that, because we anticipated tons of small projects and we just, even with the outreach, we didn't get that. And so we were able to move some money around to do some different things. And we had flexible categories and budgets so that we could do a lot more money on a couple of really key sites rather than teeny bits of money scattered around the city. Is that what you're kind of looking for?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and it is one of those things where this is great, and a great example here for the output. They've said at least 14 phase 1 ESAs. So you're saying at a minimum, we will do this, but we're not saying we're going to do exactly 15. They're giving themselves a little flexibility while still setting realistic goals for the number they're going to accomplish. But as we've mentioned, there is flexibility and you can propose something in your grant. And as long as you try your best to accomplish that, if conditions end up changing and you need to pivot a little bit, the EPA is typically flexible in allowing you to do that. But obviously you need to be proposing your best idea of what is feasible and realistic within your community. Okay, so here we have cleanup activities. So this, because it was a multi-purpose grant, the city of Pueblo was able to get funding for both cleanup and assessment. So Wade, will you talk about the process of identifying your cleanup site and how you describe that here in this slide?
Yeah, so this one was a little bit new to us too, because this is the first time we applied for a multi-purpose grant, although we did help a nonprofit with our earlier community assessment grants. So we were a little bit familiar with the cleanup grant, but it has to be owned by the city at the time you apply, I believe, Kate. And then if you, it's kind of strange where you have to identify a site that you own that you can do cleanup on. But I think technically, if something happens to that site midway through, you could then clean up another city, a different site. So you have flexibility even within. You have to commit to one, but if something happens, you can commit to another site. Then that site has to be owned at the time that you go to do the cleanup. So that was a really key thing. And I forget all the nomenclature, Kay will let you know, but you have to get like official, proof, and ours is like a part of a school lot that was given to the city. It's been a park for a long time. So trying to track down like the actual, legal ownership of that. It's just always been part of that park. So that took a while to do that. And then we chose a site that's the only community center in this kind of overburdened neighborhood that's really facing a lot of struggles. That was kind of a key to our grant. So we lucked out in that the city is actually working on the community center right now, and so this was able to free up some money that we could use then for other things to do some of this cleanup at this site. But I think since it's a multi-purpose grant, we realized that we had enough flexibility in our budget if we do have people, because you do all this outreach and then people come to you and one of the first questions, can we clean something up? And so I think we're still trying to hold back some money. We're hoping it'll be a little bit cheaper than our budget. And, could we help somebody with a $20,000 cleanup on like a commercial building downtown, or because the city has to own it, or some other project, we were hoping that we could do, additional cleanup. So the reason we picked it was a critical site in this neighborhood that was a critical thrust of our application. And then the other one is partly, I won't say it's easy, but it was, something that we own, something that we knew we were doing work on right away.
Yeah, so I will clarify that that is all true of the multi-purpose grants. For the cleanup grants, which are being offered this year, you do have to own the site and you have to clean up the site that you propose in your application. Yep. So there's a little bit more flexibility within the multi-purpose grant, not so much in the cleanup grant. But a great thing to note here, the anticipated project schedule, the cleanup will occur after the assessment and cleanup planning tasks have been conducted. So following that very logical step-by-step process, first you have to clean up or assess before you can clean up.
And I tried to be really ambitious with the timeline in this one, knowing that just all construction and cleanup projects seem to just take longer than you think. And most people know, like, you usually have to update, even if you've done phase 1, phase 2 work, you generally have to update the work before the cleanup plan. And then everything takes a little bit longer than you think. But I put most of these things really getting going by the first, end of the first year of the grant. And so was trying to be ambitious to get, by the end of the first year of the grant, we were actually starting to clean up work and maybe being finished by early in the second year of the grant.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so next we have cost estimates, and I'm going to try to cover this pretty quickly because we have a limited amount of time left before our exercise. So cost estimates are pretty straightforward, just identifying cost estimates for each task that has been identified in each budget category. So we'll cover an example here in a second. I knew that was kind of confusing. But an important thing to highlight here, you need to provide rationale for your values. Again, that Brownfield cleanup tool that Danielle showed earlier is a great option for this section here, as well as looking at existing grants, existing successful grants. Make sure, especially here, that you're providing differentiation between your indirect and direct costs, and providing just detailed breakdowns of any of these items. Again, this is a great option, or a great option to get more data is to contact your state Brownfields office. They can provide information about how much these types of activities can typically cost, or reach out to recent grantees to learn about your specific area. So in this sample budget, we have a very specific breakdown. There is a table that you will be asked to complete. You don't have to create your own table, but you do need to add the labels for each of the tasks that you're proposing. So you may not be doing any cleanup planning with your assessment grant. And so that would not be a task that you're allocating funding to. You can see here the construction costs, not applicable because it's an assessment grant. And then there are limits. So 5% limit on those administrative costs. So that's going to depend on the total amount of grant that you're asking for. Here's a cleanup grant application. So you can see here, it looks a little bit different. Cleanup oversight, cleanup, and then you have community outreach and program management, but fewer actual tasks aside from kind of those basic ones. And here you do have that construction. And again, construction is going to be your biggest cost for these cleanup grants typically. Okay. Any quick thoughts on this one, Wade?
We try to keep it in as many, just as few as categories as possible, just to be super flexible. It's like you have to be a detail-oriented person to do well at these, but then in this part drives you nuts because I think there's some of the forms for them that ask you like, what percentage of the money do you need in which quarter of the grant or something like that. Like some of the forms you fill out will kind of ask you to break this up in kind of strange ways that you don't know, but we try to keep it really, really broad. The environmental assessments you see, we've just got a huge chunk of money in there, and that could be phase 1s, phase 2s, a little bit of anything. So we really try to keep it just to, I think, like 3 or 4 categories, as broad as we possibly could.
That's a great point, Wade. And this is a screenshot of this budget table that we just looked at the example of with the City of Pueblo's costs entered in there.
Yeah, and even as I mean, this is as basic as you can get, but even with this, the project manager, when they were actually, going to do the work plan, there was like this needed to move and that needed to move, and this didn't fit this form. So I get trying to be detail oriented and trying to figure out exactly how much travel you're going to do over this time period, but having the general categories, just kind of round amounts, is great because I can't emphasize enough how flexible the Brownfields wing of the EPA is compared to maybe like the enforcement wing.
Yeah. A great note to say here, make sure that all of your line items here add up to your total grant request. And, you guys did a good job here, but that is something that sometimes can get over, be subject to somebody just going over it and missing it.
And I would just like to add 2 quick tips. One, if you are in tab EZ and using tab EZ, each grant template configuration includes a budget table that'll auto calculate totals for you. So that is, I mean, you can still go in and edit and put in your own information, but it'll auto add everything. And then the other thing I would just like to point out is make sure that in addition to everything adding up on the budget table, that the budget table accurately reflects the narrative that you described. So if you are saying that under environmental assessments, you're doing X phase 1s at this, X phase 2s at this for, that total that you draft in your narrative matches the total that you have here in the budget table. And as you're making refinements or it's going through those final revisions, like Wade was talking about getting reviewed, if any adjustments are made to the table, make sure those same adjustments are reflected in your narrative so everything aligns.
Yes. And so, yeah, saying we're going to do at least 14 phase 1s. They're going to cost $5,000 each. That equals X amount of dollars. We're going to do 6 phase 2s. Those cost $40,000 each. Those equal X amount of dollars. Combined, that totals up to this $400,000 environmental assessment figure. Okay. Last section of section 3. Your plan to measure and evaluate environmental progress and results. And again, this is because the EPA wants to see that their dedication of Brownfields funds is resulting in measurable progress within the community in addressing these environmental concerns. So a couple kind of pitfalls that other people often deal with, including completion of a cleanup plan as a measured result to track. That's not a completing something that you said that you complete is not necessarily measurable. It would be looking more towards the implementation of that cleanup plan. You need to explain that the grantee will report to the EPA through acres. So you need to say how you are going to measure and share those results. And again, just making sure that you adequately describe your outputs and outcomes in addition to outputs. So the output is the actual thing that you're producing. The outcome is the impact of that deliverable. And a lot of times, these are fairly limited timeframes. There may be outcomes that are still developing at the time that you close out your grant, and that's okay. You just need to indicate as best you can with the data that you have. Okay, Wade, thoughts about the City of Pueblo's plan to measure and evaluate environmental progress and results?
Yeah, I mean, just pretty standard stuff of just you get in the habit of just reporting to your project manager. And I think that's another one is, I don't know, Kate, if you get points or if you talk about in the schedule of just like scheduling meetings with the project manager, because that wasn't something that we did when I came aboard, and then we set that up. And so I think either every month or less than every quarter, we would, our QEP, our consultant, and myself and our project manager from the EPA would just meet, and that way, because things can get off the rails, especially if you're new and it's a lot of money and it's very complicated. So that's one thing I might suggest, is just suggesting that in your description someplace, that your staff who's managing it, would create, in addition to the Brownfields Advisory Committee, is to, to touch base with the project manager, especially when you're new. You're going to need to do that, I think. But otherwise, it's just, and there was a lot when you're new to these. It's like I said, it took me a while to figure out the type of thing, like the acres reporting. As soon as you do work, you should report in acres right away. Trying to report it later is really difficult. And so I think we were a little slow to do that. And you just don't know, though. This stuff is really like a foreign language until you do your first one. So if this is your first one, like really talk to Kate about, and KSU Tab about some other language you can put in there, and then really keep notes on that, because there's a lot of reporting compared to some grants. It's not too onerous, but the quarterly reports really need to be in on time. And if you really, are enjoying and it's working for your city and you want to apply for another one, I think they do kind of look at, are you during the performance of this grant, were you submitting the reports on time? Were you updating acres? Were you doing everything? So say that in the grant, and then try to find other kind of creative ways of really working with the EPA, just taking 30 minutes out of their time or an hour out of their month just to touch base and let them know. And then plus, if you're not making progress, you want to let them know, like, we are, we have meetings, we're trying to move with things. So sometimes people don't spend the money and they don't make progress. So just let them know that all the efforts you're doing to make progress.
Yeah. Great points, Wade. And again, I'll say it again, this is a great one to look at any example grant, any successful grant, for inspiration as to what they said that they would do. Because this is something that's going to be fairly applicable across all communities. But if you're like, I don't even know how to evaluate my environmental progress, you can look at what other communities are doing. Okay, so very quickly, there's one section that is specific to cleanup grants that we're going to cover quickly. So this talks about outlining the cleanup plan proposed for the site. You were asked to describe the contaminated media to be addressed, the cleanup method, and the disposal requirements. So your grant in this section for cleanup grants will be evaluated on the degree of the quality and reasonableness of the proposed cleanup plan. And it is not just sufficient to refer to your ABCA. Those can be very long documents. That's the analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives. You want to make sure that you're summarizing that ABCA and being very clear about the recommendations that are in that document. There's no guarantee that the EPA is ever reading the attachments. So you need to make sure everything that you want them to know is in your grant application. If you have not completed an ABCA and you're planning to apply for a cleanup grant, you are running out of time to do so. If you have questions about how you can get an ABCA done, please reach out to us and we can provide some assistance in identifying places to get those. If you are applying for a revolving loan fund grant, section 3 that we just discussed, there are 3 points at the beginning. So 3A that we just discussed is actually 3B in the RLF grants. In section 3A of those RLF grants, they ask for details of your program description and marketing strategy for your revolving loan fund. So these are all things that you need to start thinking about and is an extra step for these types of grants. Making sure that you have your staff identified for these grants, again, very important, and making sure that there is actually a market for the services. So if you are applying for an RLF as a small community, and there's maybe only 1 or 2 brownfield sites, you might not need $1 million worth of RLF, and there are other resources that may be more appropriate. Okay, this section looks really long. It actually isn't, which is great. So section 4 is programmatic capability and past performance. You are asked to reply to section 4A. There are 4 sub-bullets asking about capacity, structure, and key staff. The good news is that all of those can also be combined into a table, and then acquiring additional resources. Then for item B there, past performance and accomplishments, you only have to reply to whichever of those second level bullets applies to you. So you will either respond to BI, BII, or BIII. And those are currently has or previously received a EPA Brownfield grant, has not received an EPA Brownfield grant, but has received other federal funding, or has never received any type of federal or non-federal assistance agreements. That last one will usually only be applicable for newer nonprofit organizations. Most local governments have received some amount of federal funding. Okay, so you are near the end, but you can't treat this as a downhill slide. You do still need to be consistent and thoughtful with your responses. I would guarantee that the EPA reviewer is reviewing this with as much detail and criticism as they are looking at your grant narrative and your project description. This is the time to shine a positive light on you and your team, and to really convince the EPA that this is a good fit for your community and you have the staff and capability to deal with this funding. You need to make sure that they know that you know what it takes to make this project successful. So programmatic capability, basically describing the organizational structure that you will utilize to ensure the timely and successful expenditure of funds, your capacity for managing and carrying out the grant activities, and then asking you to provide a brief discussion of key staff. And so, okay, and this is not provided in a table, but you can respond to all of these all at once. So not a table, but you are not required to respond to each of these individually. You can consolidate your responses. So your responsibility is to demonstrate that your organization has the capacity to carry out the grant, that they are structured sufficiently to allow the grant to be completed successfully and on time, and that they are qualified to do so. Brownfields is very multidisciplinary. Any level of expertise, planners do a lot of brownfields work, even though we don't necessarily have a ton of technical environmental background. But you need to make sure that that person has time and capacity to deal with the grant and is able to learn on the job these more technical brownfields terms. And ultimately, all of this is to ensure that you're set up for success and that you can complete your grant project within whatever period of performance has been defined for your specific type of grant. The final bit here, they do ask you to break this out separately, so you can reply to 4AI through III together. AIV is dealt with separately, but this is describing how you will acquire additional resources to accomplish the work in the grant. So this is where you need to talk about your procurement processes and how you are going to go about hiring your qualified environmental professional. In 2024, they did ask you to describe your efforts to promote strong labor practices. And I think that's something that has continued through 2025. Okay, thoughts on how you described your programmatic capability, Wade?
Yeah, I was thinking about that as you were talking, and some of the things that may not jump out at you is that you may forget some of your other experience. Like our grant, we teamed up with we're going to be in a bunch of historic areas. We're working with a museum that's got one of our only historic landmark. And so I, have a lot of background in historic preservation, so I wouldn't have necessarily led with that in other applications, but that was kind of a thrust of our grant application, is to work with older neighborhoods and kind of build up and honor some of the historic places. So we have that. And then people on our team, we highlighted that. I'd also, at a previous job, had been on a brownfield. I kind of forgotten I'd worked on a brownfields project. My community was part of a coalition grant, and so it actually had a lot more experience, I kind of thought, just from doing my other project, as well as my boss had been doing brownfields smaller brownfields assessments for like over 20 years. So, and then if you're new to it, you may just want to highlight some, are you the point person for the development review team in your city so that you have all the lead-ins to meeting new people? And are you running different type of outreach groups that are very similar to what a Brownfields Advisory Committee is going to be? So maybe teasing out some of your history and your work background that supports the grant application a little bit more than you would with just a general, so-and-so is a senior planner or a grant writer for whatever organization.
Great, thanks, Wade. Okay, so the final section of the grant is past performance and accomplishments. So you will be responding, as I mentioned, to one of these and only one of them. For the city of Pueblo, they had recently received completed a community-wide assessment grant. So they responded to the first prompt. So Wade, any thoughts you had about describing your successes with this grant?
I wanted to just say we see your bureaucracy and we raise you one because, we're just big enough to have an equal level of bureaucracy, which in the one time, that's really a good thing. So we've got, establishment, we've gotten, multi-million-dollar grants from highway grants, as well as all the ARPA money that just came down. So I think they could rest assured, like we have a history of managing all sorts of grants that are actually, this is kind of one of the medium level grants that we get, we get much larger grants. And that we really, like I said earlier, tried to do all the reporting and kind of stay in the good graces of our project manager when we managed the earlier one. And that the accomplishments, like you've got that highlighted there, that, we were absolutely new to it, but then just over the 3 years, we actually did come up with some projects that are going to be really meaningful to the city and really kind of help, shine a positive light on the Brownfields program. So we try to highlight the kind of big wins that we had with our earlier program.
So Maggie, this is the last, oh, sorry, go ahead, Wade.
Oh, and they may not be huge, you're a smaller community. I just think they want to see some successes. Like we ended up getting pretty lucky with a couple of our sites, but it just as easily could have had some kind of medium level successes. But I think they know, and our consultant kind of taught me, like these are like long-term projects. Like your first community assessment, you should really be thinking about what you're going to do next. And this is like, transforming communities takes like decades, and I think they get that.
Yeah, I like that. Transforming communities takes decades, and it takes a lot of hard work as well, time and hard work. Maggie, this is our last slide of the section breakout. Any thoughts on programmatic capability and past performance?
Nope. I mean, I think you guys nailed that. I guess the one thing that I would add is, this is, your time to kind of shine, but also be honest and open. If you are especially if you are an existing grantee or maybe a past grantee, I mean, EPA is going to know how, how well you did perform, how well you did. And so, I mean, I said last time, I think, you're really drafting this narrative for that third unknown reviewer. So you still want to be detailed. At the same time, be honest. If for some reason you were out of compliance with the grant requirement, especially in EPA, it's okay to state that and then state why and then how you got back into compliance. Again, EPA just wants to know that you know how to manage, the pot of money. So keep that in mind.
Okay. So now we're going to move on to our grant writing workshop breakout exercise. Maggie, do you want to do a quick introduction here?
Sure. Quick question, Kate. Do you know, did the grant application go out to attendees?
Yes, I sent out the file.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So hopefully you guys had a chance to look at the grant narrative because we have 30 minutes for our breakout. If not, we'll allow, I don't know, we can allow some time to do a quick overview. But we'll put you into 3 different breakout groups. Kate will be facilitating a room, I'll be facilitating a room, and Scott will be facilitating a room. And we'll just allow some time to look over the narrative of section 3 in an example successful assessment grant proposal. And then we will assign somebody from the group that will kind of serve as the lead to keep notes. And we're going to then just talk through the ranking criteria and have a discussion about how well do we think, in the small groups, they scored within each section. And so that's it. And all of us facilitators will have slides that we can pull up in the breakout room and can guide that along. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms now.
And Maggie, we were a little bit behind schedule, only a few minutes though. So we can plan to dedicate 5 minutes for report out since we only have 3 groups.
Okay.
And reconvene at 11:40. So that's 29 minutes.
Okay. All right. That's
okay. And if you did not receive the documents, I will drop a link in the chat, or I'll go ahead and drop a link in the chat now. And you all will be able to download the file from the KSU Chat website. So no worries if you did not get that.
okay. Now, the question.
So I'm Melissa, and I'm going to report for our group. And we gave our grant 41 out of 45 points, and took off just a little bit for under lead. It was a little vague, just saying the city would do something, and we thought it might be stronger if it was a specific, the city planner, or at least a job title in there. We took off, let's see, we considered taking off, actually, I'll just talk about what we did take off. Under additional resources, they talked about they'll take corrective action if any activities slip, but they didn't say how or where. And so we took off 1 point to that could have been just a little bit stronger. And on project implementation, we took off 2 points, and I didn't write down exactly why, so we gave them 8 out of 10.
I just think we thought they could have been a little bit more detailed in the description of each of their tasks. I mean, it was since they did it in a table, it was very brief. And so maybe just having a little bit more detail about what each activity would be. Is why we took off a couple points.
Yeah. And then we considered under outputs and deliverables, we think it was just an oversight. But they put quantities, they had some of the quantities in there, but they put a lot of the quantities in the first column, which was a different category. And so someone stricter than the 3 of us might have taken points off for the quality, but we decided we were kind. And that's our report. We thought they did a great job.
Scott, your team?
So I'll be reporting for Scott's group. We did section 3, and overall we were pretty impressed with what they put together. We only deducted points on the lead section where they had a lack of description between the city and the QEP of who's doing what. So that was a little unclear. We would have liked a little more detail on that. And I'll be honest, we didn't get through everything. So we got as far as cost estimates, and Kermit found some discrepancies between, they claimed, what was it, 15 assessments, but only listed 14. And so just, you know, a few oversights like that were found. And so we decided to deduct a point off of that. And that's as far as we got.
That's great. Yeah, I know we had a briefer amount of time than expected. So, you know, I think just going through and thinking, putting yourself in the shoes of the reviewer is helpful. I will go ahead and do our group. We gave them 31 out of 45 points for the entire section. I think we are the harsher grader that Melissa was referencing. We felt that their task descriptions needed a little bit more detail. We found the table, just the structure of it, to be a little harder to read. The city of Pueblo had also structured their table kind of the opposite way. So you were reading down, which is, I think, the normal sort of English progression, and just was able to include more detail in those, in that format. And I think we just preferred that and thought that was a stronger way to present the information. So then we, like the first group mentioned, they could use a little bit more specificity in terms of the lead, and the project schedule. And then we deducted the most points for the outcomes because we felt that they were not specific enough and really not detailed. And most importantly, this was a little hard in the time that we had today and the fact that we reviewed sections 1 and 2 last week. But in their project narrative, they had talked about crime and economic development as their main priorities, you know, to address with this Brownfield grant funding. And we really didn't see the nexus between the outcomes of the grant and how that would impact those things that they had talked about in their project description. Notice a lot of those same discrepancies. They had talked about personnel time that was not in, so in their description, they talked about personnel time. The personnel time was not included in their budget table. As somebody else mentioned, they had inconsistencies between the number of phase 1s that they were planning to do in their task description table, but a different number that they had budgeted for. So again, just inconsistencies. We took off 5 total points for that section. And then for their implementation, we gave them a 4 out of 5. We thought it was okay, but not super specific. So anything else from my team to add to that quick summary? Wow, we graded very harshly. Greeley got 158 out of 160. I think maybe they did not look at those discrepancies in the budget table. But it definitely goes to show we can be harsher graders than the EPA themselves. And it may even vary depending on who your reviewer is as to what they're looking for, what they're paying attention to, and what they prioritize.
Well, Kate, I also think that holding them up against Pueblo might not have been fair because I think Pueblo did such a lovely job. So they kind of set a high bar, right?
They did. They set a high bar.
Which is good. We want to see that high bar.
Okay, so with that, any final thoughts on the exercise here?
I would say that maybe as, you know, potential applicants, one takeaway, hopefully you can take away from the exercise, it just for a brief moment, putting that reviewer hat on and thinking about what they might be looking for or looking at in comparison to the guidelines and the criteria. And then again, just making sure that as you're drafting your narrative and you're addressing the criteria, kind of putting that perspective on it and into place sometimes can really help.
Yes, I definitely think so.
I would
Okay.
just like to say, oh, sorry.
No,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to say really quick that I appreciate it. Tiffany and I have been working on our assessment grant application over the summer.
Mhm.
And this has pointed out a lot of areas where I'm not coming off as strong as I need to be. So I definitely appreciate this.
We're glad to hear that. I think, did you already submit your grant for review?
I did.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to redact
Scott was
it.
very impressed. We were all very impressed. So great job. And there's lots of time to just really tighten up, which is great. Okay, so we have 7 minutes left. I will quickly go through these slides here. Just a list of the anticipated FY 2025 awards. You can see the amounts vary based on the amount requested, or the number of grants awarded depends on the amount requested. Obviously, they're giving out fewer larger grants and more of the smaller grants. This table is a little bit incorrect. Those coalition grants are actually only $1.2 million this year and not 1.5. These are some slides we talked about last week, but just a really important reminder. If you take away one thing from this event, number one is look at other people's grant applications, as I've said at least 40 times. And then also thread the story throughout. So make sure that everything that you're talking about in your narrative overview, your project description, is threaded through your community need, your task descriptions. Make sure that what you're proposing to do with these grant funds responds to the challenges that your community is facing. And so you can see here in this housing example, the lack of business opportunities has led to job loss and a shattered economy. There's health and environmental impacts from the lack of housing. They have chosen sites that could be suitable for housing as priorities for assessment or abatement. And this brownfield funding will reduce barriers to allowing that site to be developed for housing, and providing housing on that site will address these challenges that the community is facing that were described at the beginning. Again, basically the same thing here. But also talk about how this aligns with your regional priorities, how you can leverage other resources to build on the grant funds that you're receiving from the EPA, and make sure that you respond to all the prompts. If they ask about existing infrastructure, you got to say one way or the other if you have it. Another thing to remember, so we talked about this the last grant webinar, but make sure that you communicate who you are. The reviewer is not guaranteed to be from your region or even from the EPA Brownfields world. So make sure that you are speaking to the third reviewer, who could be any government employee in any department, and make sure that they understand what you're asking for and why you're asking for it. So now the guidelines are released, you can start thinking about community engagement, fleshing out your narrative, reviewing again those successful grant applications online. If you're doing an assessment grant, you can use the Brownfields inventory tool to begin collecting and organizing your data to help inform your target area descriptions. If you want help on that, just send us an email. We're happy to do a one-on-one training on how to use the BIT tool. If you're planning to partner with other organizations or community-based organizations, or if you're doing a coalition grant, start reaching out to those organizations now if you haven't already, to make sure they're on board and you're not submitting this grant application without their consent. For coalition members, there is a lot more paperwork involved. You have to have a memorandum of understanding between the coalition members, so that's something to get started on ASAP. So the guidelines have been released. I would encourage you to at least skim through those in PDF format. They also have a document summarizing changes to this year's application. So if you applied previously and you want to know what's changed, the EPA has posted a document, which is very helpful. There's pretty minor changes this year, so there's not a lot to be updating if you have a previous grant application that you just need to tighten up a little bit. Go ahead and register at ksutab.org if you haven't already, and start exploring Tab EZ. As Maggie mentioned, those guidelines will be updated by the morning of Thursday, September 19th. So you can really get started in earnest. Then drafting, if you're planning to use Tab EZ, and then you can submit your grant application to KSU Tab for review. And we're accepting those through noon on Friday, November 8th. So if you are not successful, if your application does not meet threshold eligibility, so for whatever reason, if your organization is not a local government or 501c3 nonprofit, they will tell you within 15 calendar days of when they make that determination. If you're not selected for funding for other reasons, if you just didn't meet their grading criteria, you'll be notified within 15 calendar days of that decision as well. That typically is not until spring of next year. If you are not successful, you can reach out to EPA Region 8 or whatever your local EPA region is for feedback on your proposal. Those are called debriefs. They may offer them to you, but sometimes you have to request them. So I would just, when you get that notification, reach out and ask for a debrief. And you can always apply again next year. There will also be the bipartisan infrastructure law funds, that those increased levels of funding available next year. So you do still have one more opportunity to apply without a match requirement and with the extra funding. Okay, so if you are successful, you will be notified by phone, email, or postal mail, probably the first two, not the latter. In late spring last year, they were notified sometime in early to mid-March, I believe, and then they were posted publicly in late March, or sorry, May, not March, in May. The official award can take up to 90 days after notification of selection is made. So you're notified in, let's say, May that you have received the funding. It will probably take you about 6 months to go through all of the official award process, finalizing your application package and getting your work plan approved. So most communities do not start work on their grants until about October of the year after they are awarded the funding. A lot of communities who were awarded last year are preparing RFPs to go out for development, or RFPs to go out for consultants for QEPs. So that process also takes a couple months to draft your RFP, post it for typically 30 days, and then to review and award the contract. Takes a few weeks as well. So once you have that process with the EPA approved, you can begin work. If your staff is doing any work, so doing community engagement planning or hosting meetings, developing like resources, website, that can all start. But the QEP oftentimes is kind of the biggest thing that happens. There's a biggest first step once you get that grant funding approved. Again, we do offer application review. There's a 3 to 5 day turnaround. And if you are a super go-getter like Tanya and Snowy Mountain, you can request a second round of review if you are able to address our comments before the comment or the review period ends on November 8th. Okay, our almost final slide here. We are asking you all to complete the evaluation for today's event. You can scan the QR code on your phone. You can also follow this link. Maggie, would you mind dropping the link in the chat again? It is all the way at the top of the chat box. It's the very first chat, memphis.co.qualtrics.com. I'll just copy and paste that. There we go. Oh, and Maggie got it too. So yeah, you can click that link and fill out the evaluation. Click the link now. You can fill it out in the next couple days, as long as you don't close out that web page. And if you want to fill it out and you didn't get access, just send us an email and we can send you that link. Okay, contact information for today's event. I will go ahead and put my email in the chat. And please reach out with any questions that you have. We are here as a resource and we love talking about grants. At least I do. I don't know about the others, but I do. So yeah, we're happy to answer any questions and help you develop a strategy, identify data sources, flesh out anything today you have questions about. Yeah, we're happy to help.
Thank you, Kate.
All right, thanks everybody. Any final questions? I'm free, but I know we're 3 minutes over, so we appreciate everybody's time today. Bye, Scott.
I had a question.
Oh, you had a question?
Actually, I had something I wanted to add. You had mentioned about the timeline of stuff.
Yes.
One thing I did want to point out, and they put this in the guidelines, in your project schedule, EPA will allow you to spend a little money prior to next October 1. And that includes travel to the national conference in the fall of 2025. So that's an expense and an activity you can't include.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you want to attend next year's Brownfields conference in Chicago from August 3rd through 5th, I think. It's the first week of August. You can include that as a budget expense in your grant application, and they will provide a little bit of upfront funding so that you are able to attend the Brownfields conference, because those only happen every 18 months typically. All right, any other questions or comments? All right, well, we really appreciate your time today. Good luck to you all with drafting your grants, and know that we're here as a resource going forward. All right, thanks everybody.